The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi, in Oshkosh, Cheryl Hentz here. I'm not here with Dan Rylance tonight, but I am here with another Dan. Dan Rylance had a family situation come up and couldn't be here, but the other Dan I'm being joined by is Dan Becker. Dan's been on the show before. He's one of 5 candidates seeking a seat on the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education. There are 3 open seats, 5 candidates. All but one has been on this program as of this taping, and we're very pleased to welcome Dan Becker to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Now, even though Dan Rylance isn't here, he did send some questions and asked that I ask them, so I will do that. We also had a couple of viewer questions as well, so
Sure,
I don't know if I'll have time to ask any of mine, but we'll give it a whirl. Well, one of mine, I guess, first of all, you're seeking another term. Why are you seeking re-election?
There's more business to be done. I think there's some things that I personally would still like to get accomplished within the school district. Certainly the 10-year facilities plan is still yet, I would argue, undone, both from a completion perspective as in terms of a plan, but ultimately in terms of actual implementation. So again, some things to be done, both personally and I think the district really deserves a 10-year plan at this point.
Yeah,
it's long overdue.
Absolutely. About 10 years overdue.
Oh, yeah, well, arguably, yes.
Now, this, you were off the school board for a year.
Correct.
But if you discount that, how many terms have you served altogether?
I am completing my 2nd term on the board, so
okay,
a total
so
of 6 years.
Okay, all right. What have you learned during your 6 years on the board that makes you perhaps a stronger candidate or gives you an edge over some of the challengers?
Sure, certainly. Certainly the 6 years I've spent on the board have given me some unique insights into the inner workings of the school district. Just like any other organization, there's the official way to get things accomplished and the grapevine way, if you will. Certainly, depending on the situation, one works better than the other. Certainly not to discount the official way, but oftentimes things get done more efficiently in other ways.
Okay.
In terms of school finance in Wisconsin, that's certainly a topic that one could probably get a master's degree in.
Yeah.
Only in so much as it's very complicated. I wish the challengers any amount of luck that they can get before the election to garner as much knowledge as they can, because inevitably at least 2 of them are going to be elected, if not 3. Obviously, depending on how the election comes out, and that's, I believe, an important facet of serving on the board. You definitely need to understand how state finance works in terms of public education.
Yeah. Well, and whether you've served no terms or 10 terms, there's always on-the-job training.
True.
There's always something that comes up that you've not maybe dealt with in the past. So what would you say has been, in your time, either this term or the previous term, what would you say has been maybe 1 or 2 of your strongest contributions or accomplishments to the board?
Well, certainly in terms of contributions, Oshkosh East High School. Well, I think it's a valuable program, Cheryl, and I certainly wish it to continue. That's still a topic of discussion at the board level. But in terms of an accomplishment, we as you are well aware, and I'm sure your viewers are well aware, we're suffering through some financial woes at this point. And one of the things that I was instrumental in bringing forward was a relocation, or a moving it from the Eagles Club into, hopefully, and again still to be discussed, a district-owned facility as a means of saving arguably in excess of $100,000 a year off of our bottom line. Again, certainly want to see the program continue. I think it's a very deserving program. I think it's one that serves the kids well, but one I'd like to personally see within the four walls of a district-owned facility.
Well, you know, speaking about where it could go, I'm at a loss now to remember who brought this up. I thought it was one of the candidates, but I could be wrong. But someone suggested kind of, maybe it was Steve Dito, who suggested shifting some people, I believe he said, over to Tipler and maybe putting east into the administration building. What do you think about a concept like that?
In fact, unbeknownst to Mr. Dito, that's actually been a conversation that's gone on as part of the maintenance building relocation that played a small part in that conversation. Now, ultimately, that didn't happen because of some other logistical issues, but you know, certainly that makes more and more sense as time goes on and on with declining enrollment, which obviously frees up space in some of our traditional school buildings. Certainly putting them in central administration would allow for access to the gymnasium at Tipler, the library or media center facilities at Tipler, and still allow them to maintain some anonymity in their own building. So absolutely. In fact, that's been a topic of conversation and one I hope will continue as we move forward.
You mentioned declining enrollment. What can we do in the Oshkosh area school district to, you know, build up that enrollment? I realize part of it is, you know, just because people are growing up, you know, they're aging, but another part of it is because there's people doing homeschooling, people are leaving the district for whatever reason. What can we do to turn that around a little bit?
Well, as
or
you,
a lot?
right, absolutely. As you're well aware, again, the budget concerns, I think, are playing at least a small part in people's decisions to leave us, and I think that's rather unfortunate. The Oshkosh area school district provides an exemplary education for its students. We rank continuously in the upper echelons in state testing. It's unfortunate that people choose to leave us as a result of budgetary constraints that we may have. My sincerest goal is that we can get through those and deal with those and keep the impact as far away from children as we possibly can, and I've long tried to do that. Oftentimes the first answer that people give to solve our budgetary situations is to raise taxes. And certainly that's an option that's available to the board, but as I've told you on numerous occasions, I think there's other options out there that we can undertake long before we start to impact students. You know, certainly at this point in time, as you're probably well aware, the district is looking at alternative health care providers. You know, I advocated for that 7 years ago, Cheryl. I can only wonder, sitting here today, what this district would look like had we chosen to take a look at that as an option 7 years ago. Arguably, there's $2 million a year to be saved in health insurance. Well, 7 years times $2 million a year, that's $14 million we could have had to spend other ways, whether it be textbooks or additional programs, whatever the case may be. So, you know, back to my original point, which is, you know, there are certainly some other things we can still do before we look at raising taxes. Will we inevitably have to raise taxes? Yes. There's no doubt about that in my mind, but I've always long maintained that there's other things we need to do before we look at taxes as a means to that end. It's the easy way out.
Well, speaking of raising taxes, there were two public, I'll call them hearings. They're not really hearings, but they were public meetings where the public came in and talked about what they kind of wanted to see from a budgetary standpoint. You were not at either of those two.
That is true.
Why did you not attend either one?
The first of them was actually scheduled in early December. I actually had full intention of attending that gathering. As your viewers may recall, though, that was the night of the snowstorm, and the meeting was canceled and rescheduled. And it was rescheduled for the night after the other, which was at the time the second one that was scheduled, so they were on consecutive nights. Unfortunately, Cheryl, had some work commitments. I had a room full of 22 students waiting for me that evening to conduct a class, so I had prior commitments. Do I regret not being able to attend? I certainly do, but my students come first.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, one of the things that, was a resounding, I think, tenor of that meeting was that, raise taxes but don't cut things. And I'm looking for my notes here on that particular thing because obviously the board didn't do that. They made a decision recently to lay off the full-time equivalent of some 35 teachers, increase class sizes. Some programming will probably be cut as a result of these teacher layoffs. There's a couple of things about this meeting. I guess first of all, how does an elected official, whether it's on the school board, city council, county board, whatever, when you've got a bunch of people saying we'd rather have this over this, how do you balance that with what you feel in your heart is the best thing to do?
Certainly that plays a large role in the decision-making process. But the other part that you didn't mention was the quiet minority.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, certainly the folks that come to the meeting are the vocal folks. I mean, obviously they're there to make their opinion heard, but there are all those folks that sit at home as well. You've got a balance between who shows up at the meeting and who you see at the grocery store, the gas station, the library, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
So I oftentimes struggle with a lot of those decisions. I don't think that's any surprise to folks. There's been a number of decisions. The one that comes immediately to mind is the one you cited, but also the Green Meadow issue that we looked at back over the course of the summer. I've long been an advocate of neighborhood schools, still am to this day, but we were forced because of some of the decisions made in Madison on state funding at the 11th hour to make some real rash decisions at the 11th hour, arguably. I struggled with that for a long time. Sat and pondered, and there was really no other solution, unfortunately, for the folks at Green Meadow and Lincoln. The state backed us into a corner. That was the last thing I absolutely wanted to do. As I said, there's other things we can do, and I'm glad to see we're actually starting to make progress towards at least some of those.
One thing that bothered me about a comment that you made following those meetings, Dan, was that they were biased, because there were some teachers in the audience, but there were parents also, who were stating their desires on things. But you said that they were biased. Well, I think everybody's biased to, when you have an opinion, you're biased.
By definition, absolutely.
But you didn't say that several years ago about the parents who came en masse to the school district, either by way of petition or actually at the school board meeting over the calendar issue. You didn't call them biased at that time, and I'm wondering,
Sure.
why you felt it necessary to say these folks were biased.
Two reasons, actually. The calendar issue was more widespread. Okay, it affected everyone within the district, and again, the cuts that or the public hearings, as you called them, affect a large amount of people. But again, there's a differing complexity. And the other issue, I lost my train of thought here, was that there's a certain amount of, well, dare I say it, behind the scenes activity that went on from what I was able to ascertain. There were some members of our teaching staff that encouraged anyone and everyone they could find to attend those meetings.
What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that, so long as you realize that from the outset. As I said before, there's a silent majority out there in this community. They weren't provided an opportunity.
Well, of course they were. They could have gone.
They certainly.
Everyone had an opportunity to go to those meetings.
They certainly did, but arguably, it's far easier. I don't think you disagree with me that it's far easier for our teaching staff to get to them. Arguably, some of them are right in the same building, compared to let's say the second shift worker at Oshkosh Corporation that's committed to doing his job or her job. We don't always make our meetings as convenient for everyone as possible. Myself is the perfect example. So again, it becomes a matter of broad-based input, arguably. Yes, I heard what was said. The board was provided with all the minutes from those meetings. We got all the comments, and I was glad, and certainly offer my thanks to Dr. Lang for doing that. The input was received, but again, it's got to be taken with a grain of salt, because as I was later informed, and I had my suspicions up front, there was some selective invitation by some of our staff members.
I don't think that's, I mean, selected invitation, again, anybody could have gone, Dan, and I don't want to beat this issue to death, but you take the second shift worker or even a third shift worker who may still be sleeping at that hour, they can communicate their wishes by email, by phone, by surface mail.
And absolutely they can, but that's not what we're talking. We're talking about the meeting and who was there at that meeting.
Well, okay, but so people organized. People organize a lot in this country. And that there's nothing illegal about that.
No,
there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean that they're more biased than someone else.
No, it doesn't. But you, again, need to take it with the grain of salt that's the way it was put forward. Certainly, and again, I don't mean to sidetrack the conversation, but if you went to an NRA gathering, there's certain things you wouldn't discuss probably. You'd have an idea what the response was going to be. So consequently,
go.
Well, obviously, and nothing wrong with that, but you understand my point. If you're going to go to a large gathering of teaching staff, and arguably there was a large portion of teaching staff at both of those meetings, from what I could see, even from the pictures in the Northwestern, you've got to understand that there's going to be a predisposition to a certain answer, or a predisposition to a certain point of view.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
All right. Let's talk about the other meeting, the one that was held at Alberta Kimball. And that, I think another school board member's comment got people very upset. Dr. Lemberger's comment that, the students were, acting paranoid and jumping to conclusions, basically, about what was happening. And yet, I mean, that really rubbed both Dan and I the wrong way, and a lot of other folks that I've talked to too, because they were just reacting to what the district had put out. I mean, that's all they were doing. And, and then, well, maybe they should wait to see what's going to happen. Well, even you board members don't know for sure what's going to happen.
Very true.
I think that was just a horrible comment for him to make. And really was a slap in the face to all those kids who I thought were really articulate. I mean, you talk about a good school system. The fact that they can articulate their feelings like that, and I think they did it in a professional, respectable manner, and then just kind of backhanded him with his comments.
Well, I don't disagree with you. The comments we got from our high school students, whether they be freshmen or seniors or anywhere in between, were impressive. As you said, they were very articulate. In terms of Dr. Lemberger's comment, I'm not going to comment on his comment. I mean, certainly that's something he can do for himself. You bring that up. It's ironic. One of the notes one of the notes I made prior to going to that meeting was cuts versus class size and the differentiation, because that's really what it came down to. We didn't actually cut any classes that evening, Cheryl. As you now know, we actually increased class sizes. And again, the misconception was that we're actually cutting classes. Now that still may remain to be the case when actually all the scheduling is done here in the next week or two at our high schools.
But, and by the time this airs, that will be done.
Right. But as you said, quite frankly, we don't know the answer to that yet.
Right. Okay, we're down to like 10 minutes, so I want to jump into Dan Rylance's questions.
Sure.
How do you view your role on the Oshkosh School Board? Team player, contrarian, anti-teacher, or anti-woman? And again, don't shoot the messenger. It's not my question.
That wasn't my intent. I was merely contemplating the options. If I can throw another option in there, I would say contrarian team player. Only because certainly there's some things I do not support that come forward before the board. But by the same token, I think it's important to take into account all votes.
Okay.
When it comes down to it, probably less than 5 to 10% of the time I vote no.
All right. Another one. On being anti-woman, why have you not been able to get along with either Amy Weinsheim or Karen Bowen? You often get into a fight with them, always have to have the last word, and never seem to forget. Do you have a problem with women who have different views than yours?
I actually take just the slightest bit of offense, and I realize he's not here, with the assumption that I'm anti-woman. I think you'd get a different story from my wife, certainly. I think you'd get a different story from some of the women I deal with in other parts of my life. In terms of my battles with, and I'll use the word battles, with Mrs. Weinsheim and Mrs. Bowen, it merely comes down to a matter of philosophical difference. That's all I mean, that's quite simply it.
But does it have to be nasty?
Oftentimes, to be honest with you, I'm not always the instigator on some of those things. If any of your viewers are astute watchers of Board of Education meetings, there's oftentimes that both of the aforementioned individuals were the instigators, arguably, whether it be eye rolling or sighing or whatever the case may be. In fact, at the most recent meeting, Mrs. Bowen and I arguably got into a little bit of a spat. I respect Mrs. Bowen's opinion. Do I agree with her? Sometimes, not always. But it does come down to a matter of, and I'll take at least partial responsibility for it, sometimes we don't treat each other with as much respect as we should. And as I said, I'll take partial responsibility for that.
That's a fair answer. Okay. Well, this is one of my questions. As far as the offer that was tendered to Dr. Gundlach 2 years ago, do you take any responsibility for, I know in the press at the time you said that perhaps one of the reasons that he pulled out was because you had raised some potential conflict of interest issues. Do you take any responsibility, Dan, for, as a fiscal conservative, the fact that he may likely have pulled out as a result of that issue, and that set the district back 2 years, cost the district additional money in consulting fees and doing the search all over again?
It did cost the district a small bit of money in terms of doing the search again, but it didn't actually cost us any additional consulting dollars.
Okay.
Because the search firm, actually, it was a package deal. They bring us a superintendent if the search, for whatever reason, didn't bear fruit, if you will. There was no additional expense. It incurred a little additional expense in terms of travel for candidates and those type of things. And for that, I'm truly sorry. However, I still to this day believe I did the right thing in at least asking the questions regarding Dr. Gundlach.
Don't you think it would have been addressed, though? I mean, people knew the situation.
People did know the situation, and again, I think I can talk about this now. One of the other requests that I had made at the time was that these issues be fully resolved before we actually tendered an offer to Dr. Gundlach, just to make sure that arguably our I's were dotted and our T's were crossed. And the board majority at the time decided to move forward with it in lieu of my objection to that. And arguably, and I said this I believe on the radio at the time, given the opportunity to get those questions answered from the State Attorney General's office, I would have had no problem moving forward with Dr. Gundlach as our superintendent, but he had actually already withdrawn his name at that point in time.
All right. Another fiscal conservative type question here, and this one's from Dan. We've talked about you view yourself as a fiscal conservative and routinely complain about costs and so forth, and yet there was one example too where there was a lot of nitpicking, and this was between you and Amy Weinsheim, a lot of nitpicking over votes in the recount that you had against her. How do you justify the approximately $20,000 spent on the recall at your request, especially when there was so much nitpicking and when it really was more about, it seemed, I think, to the public, about getting votes thrown out because of little things than it was about making sure every vote was counted?
Well, I believe it's actually about, Cheryl, every properly cast ballot or vote counted. And arguably there were some things uncovered as part of that recount that caused the folks right down the hall here at City Hall, I think, to re-examine some of the things they do.
But
as part
things
of the
happen in
election
every
process.
election.
They do, but that's
and as
no-
long as you can ascertain voter intent, wouldn't it make more sense to have every vote counted as opposed to tossing votes out because this wasn't signed in pen and this didn't have 2 signatures on it or whatever?
Well, and again, it comes down to how those ballots were actually filled out. Certainly when it comes to absentee ballots, those are completely outside of anyone's view other than the person stuffing the ballot in the envelope. So we arguably don't know without a proper address or a proper signature on the envelope who actually cast that ballot. And that's the only contention I ever made on absentee ballots was, is it properly signed and is the address on the outside of the envelope proper?
Okay. All right. Boy, this time is just flying by here. At the public meeting at the Alberta Kimball Auditorium, you were in dramatic mode when you threw down the gauntlet by saying you were drawing a line in the sand that future cuts must come from salaries and benefits of the teachers. What about your wife's benefits as a teacher in Omro? Are the taxpayers of Omro paying for the medical insurance of the Becker family in Oshkosh? And he had pulled your wife's salary for 2008-2009. In Omro, it was $41,113, and her benefits were listed as $26,683 for a total of $67,696.
I'll trust that his math and ultimately yours is correct.
Well, I did the math. He pulled the stuff. So it was a joint effort there on the math and so forth. But so are they paying the benefits for the Becker
They are,
family?
and thank you to the taxpayers of Omro. But that being said, I think the distinction needs to be drawn at this point in time. The folks in Omro are obviously in contract negotiations with their teachers union as well, and I'm aware that they're actually talking about something far less than we've ever talked about in terms of a total compensation
Now,
settlement.
how can they do that, Dan, when there are the quid pro quo laws in effect?
Well, arguably, if both parties agree, quid pro quo doesn't apply.
If they both agree,
If
but
they both
I mean,
agree.
do you think that? Well, I don't know. You probably don't have any idea what the teachers union there is going to do, but I can't imagine a teachers union would be willing to, take huge cuts.
Well, it's unfortunately come to that, Cheryl. It's either we look at the 85% of the budget that we have control over, or we look at closing buildings, we look at increasing class sizes, we look at cutting programs. Arguably the change in insurance has no impact on students. It has no impact, arguably, I understand, on teachers. If we can actually mirror benefits and do it for a lesser expense, other than having to fill out additional paperwork, there's no impact on staff.
Okay. All right. Gosh, very quickly, we've got like 1 minute left. Do you think it would be responsible for the district to base its budget on a salary freeze for employees who do not have settled contracts?
Is it reasonable? No. Is it something I'd like to see us strive for? Absolutely. But I'm not naive enough to think that we can get to a salary and benefit freeze. Certainly the cost of health insurance, as we've just talked about, is ever increasing. We need to do what we can to minimize the growth of those premiums, but arguably there's going to be some incremental cost in salary and benefits. But again, we need to do whatever we can.
And then just real quickly, there are some buildings, there are some schools that aren't as efficient as they once were or as they could be, perhaps. Would you support closing any school if it's operating in a very inefficient manner?
It's going to be a tough sell for me to vote to close a school unless it poses a safety hazard to our students at this point in time. Until such time as we've exhausted all other options that have, again, as I said before, no impact on students, it's going to be a tough sell for me to vote to close a school.
And because you would like to see salaries and benefits reined in a little bit.
Well, not necessarily reined in. Again,
Okay.
I think there's things we can do that'll have absolutely no impact.
Okay, all right.
I've argued in the past that any savings from health insurance could actually be negotiated over with our various union groups.
All right. So school closure might be there, but chances are not, because
At
until
this
you've
po- at this-
exhausted all those
yep,
other things.
and that's the position
Okay.
I'm going to take at this point, because I
Okay.
think that's what's best for our kids,
Okay.
ultimately.
All right, excellent. Well, we're out of time, so thanks for coming. I
Oh, I
appreciate
appreciate
it. The election is on Tuesday, April 6th. You have a choice to vote for 3 candidates for the Oshkosh School Board. We're going to take a real short break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by 2 candidates running for Oshkosh Common Council, so we'll be right back.
Dear Mom and Dad, well, I finally have some time off, so I'm writing to tell you that I'm doing well. We have good days and bad days over here. We try to remember the good ones and get through the bad ones. Mostly we have each other, and that's what keeps us going. And Mom, since you asked, if anyone wants to help, just tell them to contact the USO. You can't believe how much they do for us. With love, your son, Michael.
Every year, the U.S. Department of the Treasury receives about 1.4 million reports of problems with paper checks. Checks can be lost, stolen, or delayed. If you still receive Social Security payments by paper check, Treasury wants you to know about a safer, more convenient way to get your money. The Direct Express Prepaid Debit MasterCard. The Direct Express card is new and is available to anyone receiving Social Security benefits, even if you don't have a bank account. Your monthly benefits will be automatically placed onto your card account each month on the day your money is due. While other debit cards cost money, it is possible to use the Direct Express card for free to make purchases, pay bills, and get cash at thousands of locations nationwide. There are no sign-up or monthly account fees. No more waiting for the mail or worrying about lost or stolen checks. Call 1-877-212-9991 or visit www.usdirectexpress.com.
We were in an emergency situation. We don't have extra. We have a little bit of water and a little bit of food. A meeting place, no.
No.
I don't think we have a first aid kit.
We have tuna fish, we have
Right.
beans, we have canned tomatoes,
True.
you know.
That's true, but that's really not survival food. Tomato paste.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Last
Right,
one
yeah.
that night.
Here we go.
It being stormy with that.
Yeah. All right, welcome back to the second half of Eye on Oshkosh. Brian Poeschl and Burk Tower are joining us now. They are each candidates for the Oshkosh Common Council. Again, that election also coming up on Tuesday, April 6th. There are 3 seats, 6 candidates in all, and between tonight and next week's show, we will be interviewing all 6 again, as we did before the primary. And Burk is the only incumbent seeking re-election. So thanks to both of you for being here. We appreciate it. And you know, feel free during this segment to have dialogue with each other if you want. Dan Rylance isn't here. He had a family situation come up, but he sent some questions along. So I'm going to ask
Okay.
questions for both of us
Great.
tonight.
Get right to it.
At what point should the Common Council simply say no for more big events, buildings, or whatever the case may be in Menominee Park, and just preserve it for the open space many residents prefer? I'll let the incumbent go first.
Sure, you go ahead on that one there, Bert.
That's a good question. I look for a recommendation from the Parks Board on that. I think we're beginning to get to that point, because I think we want to preserve the, particularly a part of it to be open, and the rest of it's pretty well taken. Obviously, we had our preference to probably just soon not have the pump station there, but I think we're kind of caught betwixt and between, and those things happen. So you hate to draw a line too deeply in the sand, because things can happen. But in general, I think we're approaching that point now.
Okay.
May even be a little bit past it with.
Yeah.
I actually think it's time pretty much to say no more of those things in the parks, because I do remember back in either 2004 or 5 when I was on the council that we had the big situation of the new zoning divisions and subdivisions, that you had to have so much green space for a park in different places. And even though I know the pump station has to be where it is, but I think that's pretty much the end of it, because pretty soon with what you keep doing in Menominee Park, I don't know if you're going to have enough green space for the recommended park that was way back in 2005 when that big booklet came out of all the green space.
Okay. Should dogs, this is a combination between both Dan's question and mine, should dogs be allowed on a leash in some or all parks? And, and I've heard different things on this. Why is such an issue being made out of the fact that it may be difficult to enforce this, or it may be impossible to enforce this? It's really no different, I don't think, than any other ordinance that we have. If the city is not aware of it, or, on their own, or it doesn't get reported to them, you could say the same thing about speeding. Somebody could go flying down any street in the city of Oshkosh, and unless an officer is there or someone calls in with a plate number, it can't be enforced. So I don't know why such a big issue is being made of this hard to enforce or impossible to enforce issue. But, we've talked about this a little bit in the past when you each were on. Where do you stand on dogs in the parks? Because I don't think this issue is going away anytime soon.
Oh, I don't believe it's going to go away either. I will say myself, as far as I'm not an animal lover as far as that goes. I think you have to go all or nothing. It can't be as far as some parts of this because of petition, some parts that because of petition. To make it easy to be enforced, if there is a problem, it has to be for everything. If it is a certain length of a leash, I'm all for it. And I would hope that as far as if it does go through that way and would be voted on, that the public would go by that and be happy that it was voted on and passed through, compared to the ones that might have a leash 20 feet long as they're jogging through the park and the dog's kind of tagging along with the leash, maybe put their ankle or their arm as they're jogging. Or if it's the 3 or 4 foot leash and they have control of the animal, which is totally a different situation. But I think you're right. At anything, it's hard to enforce because you can do it today and they could call you tomorrow and say, did you do this? So that's all difficult. But I think if it's going to be done, it's going to be for all, not just for some.
Okay. Burk, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are in general, I think we ought to look at it, bring it up again. We've gathered some information, as you know before, from some other areas. And I think we ought to see what are some of the best practices. We have some cities have them in the parks now, so I'd recommend is that we find out from those people what is the best set of conditions. It's not a question, do we have dogs or not? If the answer is yes, under what kinds of conditions? There's some waste issues attached to there. There are some issues with some people who are concerned about what kinds of dogs are in the park, what kinds aren't. I mean, I think it may well be possible to, and I'd like to see a recommendation from the Parks Board, to allow it in some parks, give it a trial, see how it works. If you look at those cities that do allow dogs in the park, there are several sets of conditions. It varies from, yes, dogs are allowed in the park anywhere, to just, yes, if it's a trail that's connected to another trail. So I think if we talk to some other cities that had it and said, what's the best practice? If you were to do it again, how would you do it differently? We can come up with it. So I'd like to see from the Parks Board, because the new Parks Director wants to come up with a plan, which may go back to your first question, and what should be the role of the park for citizens, and make a recommendation, yes or no. And I'd like to see it come, if we do have dogs in the park, what would be the conditions of having dogs in the park?
Speaking of the new Parks Director, I haven't met him yet. We want to have him on the show, but boy, he started at a time when he's got a lot on his plate. There's a lot of stuff on his plate.
Yes.
But I like the way he's begun with the idea that there really is not a plan, and I think that's the problem with both these issues, quite frankly, as I've argued before when I was here the last time. I think we can come up with a parks plan. It may take a little patience to get there. But both of these questions, both of your first two questions, would be very much a part of that plan. It would help us as we move forward, so we don't have to make these decisions one decision at a time based just on the facts surrounding that decision.
Okay, good enough. Although sustainability is supported by all candidates, it is a reality that it's going to cost more than it'll save, at least up front. It's going to cost a lot. If you agree with that, then could you give a couple of examples? And if you disagree, provide a couple of examples.
As I stated in one of the debates we had, as far as it's the way that we're going to the future, and as far as what everything's going to be, I don't know what the costs are going to be, so I really don't have that answer for you. And I can only say I've only learned by watching all the city issues that have been about it with the different committees on the Channel 2 and Channel 10 in the city council meetings. So I would have to say it's pretty much a gray area for myself until I see more about it to find out more about the expenses and what it would save as far as that goes, or for the future, the expense now compared to the future, what it's going to save, if it's going to meet itself up, or if it's just going to be another thing to spend money and hope that someday we catch up.
I think in the short run, there are a number of things we can do. It's important for all of us to preserve the future in a variety of ways. And the other thing is what do you mean by sustainability? How wide is that particular term? But there are things that you can do in the short run. I think there have been some suggestions for people. The Sustainability Board has done the audit and made some recommendations on with respect to the bike paths. I think we can do that. I think we can always change some lighting. We can encourage citizens to engage in practices that are better for water runoff, for instance. So I think we identify those things that are lower cost at first. When we take on projects, we ask about sustainability, look at the cost. There's so much information that's not known. I've looked a good deal into wind technology, and we don't know what the cost and the payback is. We don't know. I think we ought to try a couple things. The city is prepared to at least do a little bit with Renewigy, conceivably, with trying a windmill. The university's going to try some windmills. We look and see what happens on those and what kinds of cost savings there are. So I think in the short run, you do those things you can that don't cost quite as much. You begin to make plans for the bigger ones. We continue to study it, but we have to keep attached to it.
Sure.
On the Landmarks Commission, we talk about preservation of, historical preservation, and that's an aspect of sustainability, and there are costs there. And
Sure.
so do it step by
Speaking
step.
of the Sustainability Board or Advisory Board Commission, whatever you want to call it, Burk as a council member and Brian as a citizen, a taxpayer, and a prospective council member, how do each of you feel about the board and the work that they've done so far? Are they doing the right amount of work? Are they doing the right kinds of work? What improvements, if any, could be made there?
I think they got off to a rough beginning.
Yeah.
As any new board, they had a difficult concept to define. They couldn't figure out how to define it. It's taken a couple of years. So, but it would in a number of areas. In an area like sustainability with so much unknown. So I think Ron Hardy's done a nice job of trying to come in and say, we need a plan, and working on aspects of the plan at the same time, trying to get some things done. Again, the greenhouse emission audit, pushing the bike plan. So I think they're beginning to move in the right direction. What we have to do is coordinate some of their work with where the council is and figure out how those two can fit together. So I think we're headed in the right direction. As long as I think the focus on the idea of having a plan and then working the plan is going to be worthwhile. So.
Brian?
I think too, as far as they started off on a rough start, and for the committee, I think they're doing a good job now, but it took a while, as I watched it to begin with, there was a lot of, as I'll say, everyone wanted to be a chief of this and of that, and it took a while for them to come together and believe in each other and work with them all together. And I think now they've done it in the past probably, I'll say 4 to 5 months or so, and you can see that with watching their meetings. They go a lot smoother. And I look at it as any other public board as far as it's citizens that want to do that kind of thing and are getting involved. And as far as, you can't ask for more for citizens to be on the different boards. And I think just take time, but as far as, I also agree that as far as you hear about it, and I think that for them to get noticed more, and even as you say, the citizens help, as you're mentioning, to buy into different things, they need to get mentioned more in with the council ideas when they talk about different things. And as far as, I think the more they get talked about, the more they'll feel that they're doing the right thing with being a group working together. And the more that they get talked about in ideas that the council comes up with, as people do take notice of the council meetings and those things, that the public will start to become more aware of it. And with all that working together, I think they'll continue to go in the right direction, which I think they're headed.
Okay, good. Burk, this is a question primarily for you, since you are on the council and this happened, since this board's been created and put into place. Why, and I've heard this from other people too, why is it started out sort of as a standalone committee, then all of a sudden it came under the umbrella of the Community Development Department. Why did that happen? And is that the best place for it to be?
I don't have an answer for why it happened. I actually think it's a better place than where it started out. I think at that time they were looking for somebody on the city to be a part of it, and they found an individual who was a part of it. I think it belongs in community development. I think sustainability is very much attached to community development. So I think that was a positive move. As to why it started where it started, I suspect in the beginning you try to make things happen that you can make happen. I'm a realist. I think it was done realistically, and then I think they saw the value of saying there is a place where it is most logically placed. And I think community development is there because you're trying to preserve things for the future in terms of the community, and you're going to have to balance some things. In community development, there's going to have to be a lot of balancing as we move forward. So I think
Okay.
it's appropriately there.
All right, excellent. The recent approval of a TIF for Oshkosh Corp. clearly indicates that the power of the applicant trumps the legislative intent of TIFs. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Let you give the answer now.
I would disagree.
Since you voted for it, I assumed you probably would disagree with that.
A really strong statement. I can understand how that would be because it's a powerful organization that was there. But one reason that they're powerful is because they have a lot of, they provide a lot to the community, and particularly in the area of jobs. And jobs trump all in politics, as we know. We can go back to the national level. When Clinton was there versus when Obama was there, and their popularity is based on what's going on in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think jobs has a lot to do with it. I don't think it was the fact that they're a corporation and strong. I think it was the fact that they employ a lot of people, and employment, particularly at good wages, is extremely important out there. So I think it was more an issue of their significance and importance than their size that was a factor. But I think that factor did trump a lot. Jobs trumps a great deal, particularly when an economy is down. In fact, it was interesting. I thought you were probably going to ask something along that. So I did find an article. There's an article from Sealy, Texas, which is talking about the concerns in that community as they move from 3,200 employees at loss of this contract back to about 1,500. And I think it demonstrates the power of jobs and the concerns of things attached to jobs. So I wouldn't look at it as size. I would look at it as, obviously, that to have as many jobs as they have, you're going to be large. So
Okay.
I'd actually say I'd agree with you. I mean, as far as granted, it was a good thing as far as for all the people that are employed in this city and around the Valley area that do work at Oshkosh Corporation, but I guess for my answer of saying for a disagree is where I would like to see what would happen if another company of close to their size would have came for this that maybe didn't employ as many Oshkosh people, and as far as to keep the city growing with industry as much as we don't have that much industry around anymore, building the trucks and those things. I look back at the Leach Company and what they went through and different things that have been interesting to see if they had something like this, and they might still be around for all those jobs. We didn't come here, but I'm sure, I know it was a tough vote watching the meeting that night, but I'd agree I'd have voted for it just like they did. I just think that you are right. In a situation like this, there's jobs at hand, people's lives at hand, keeping industry in the city of Oshkosh that I'm sure I would agree that it had to trump some, but it still was a tough vote.
Okay.
again, I think it's the jobs that trump and their economic value to the community,
Right.
not the fact that they're large per se.
Okay. All right. And another question then from Dan. If the economy tanks further in 2010, what priorities would you identify for possible budget cuts in 2011? And he's got three, like a multiple choice thing. Privatization of certain city services, a wage and benefit freeze for all city employees, or something else?
I would say my number one would be as far as the wage and benefit freeze as far as that, because I remember back in even 2004 and 5 we had tried something like that, and the simple answer then was as far as we have this chart of what the people's jobs in the city of Oshkosh are, and they go in this chart no matter what for this many years, and we couldn't freeze anything back at that time. And I still think that's to keep people as far as employed, which I want to do the best that I can to keep people employed. I'd have to say that it'd be a wage freeze and keep them employed compared to having to lose jobs. I mean, I'm with anyone else as far as you'd rather be working than looking elsewhere and not have the money coming in. So I would have to say that my first area would be to look at freeze of wages and try to keep everybody employed to keep the field happy that way, and have to go different if that doesn't work.
Okay.
Well, I think you ask the city manager some things about where we can save some costs. Privatization isn't going to do it quickly because, first of all, I'm not sure we can privatize much that the city does at this particular time. And if you do privatize, there's generally some upfront cost because you have to, particularly when you're in a unionized environment. So privatization is not going to be the answer. Unfortunately, I think the answer would ultimately be some layoffs of people for a couple of reasons. One, well, you may want to say you're going to freeze wages, and my guess is we would try to keep wages down. We're not in control when it comes to that. State arbitration procedures in control. Just look at what we've gone through in the last contract negotiations and going through now. So we're not in control on that. So we can try to do some things, but I think ultimately where we are in control is in who we employ and how many we employ. And unfortunately, when you cut people, you have the greatest savings. I mean, you can only cut so much in the way of cutting down hours at the library by an hour. And so, unfortunately, if we can't do it any other way, it's going to be two things.
Yeah.
The issue then would be okay, what services are you going to cut first? And that'll be partially political, and I couldn't say exactly where I stand right now. Obviously, those that have the least value, how you measure value is difficult to ascertain. So I think it would be jobs and services that would have to go eventually. That's the reality.
All right. This is kind of a combination of both mine and Dan's question. Oshkosh does seem to kind of lack the willpower or the financial means to establish a deferred maintenance fund. And in particular, I'm thinking about the Leach right now, but we don't seem to have one for the water park. We don't seem to have one for the Grand Opera House. You know, what's it going to take for us to develop some kind of a fund that will do capital improvements and maintenance at some of these facilities?
I thought, first of all, that the water park did have a fund built up that way. I thought it was part of the deal when he started. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought there was one. I could be wrong, but I thought they had one developed, right?
There is some there.
Okay.
For the water park, but other ones, those are tough. And I think we'll hopefully see something come out of the special events deal that maybe can go in that way, because I agree we do need some type of maintenance fund that, who knows, in 15 years from now that we need something done to Leach, and it's going to be, okay, where we're going to get that money from. Or as you say with the Grand, I hope that after this renovation is done, as I watched the meeting that night that you sat through for many hours sitting and listening to everybody, that where Mr. Macy and him talked about hoping to get together and have something go forward, that they can start developing that in another 50, 60 years, if it happens again, whatever it is, that there'd be money there compared to having to do what they did with everybody coming together and making it be a really big issue. And we have to do something. I don't know if it's adding, like they talked about the one night, 25 cents, 50 cents or something like that. Other cities do it. I know when you buy tickets for events, there's always a fee for the maintenance in different funds, that it's like you hear the big push, $15 tickets, but when you buy your ticket, it's more like 24, 28 with everything that's on that type of deal. So I'm thinking you might have to do something like that, but I'm hoping something comes from the new policy they're trying to work on with the special events, those things. It might incorporate something that would be a whole laid down thing for every event that you have, not that it's $1 for the Leach, it's 50 cents for the Grand, or it's whatever it is for the water park or different places. That it's a blanket deal, and it's just that's the way it is for the city of Oshkosh.
Well, we have each of those venues where it'd be nice to have a fund. And actually, there is an extra charge on the tickets at the Grand. There is something at the water park, and there is something at the Leach. Actually, if you're a profit-making organization, in fact, there's $20,000 in the fund at this particular point in time. Where it gets tricky is that to do it, you're either going to have to raise taxes or cut services, because we end up with a zero budget. So if we're going to start putting money for parks and other places where you don't have the ability to tack on a charge, we're going to have to make a conscious decision that saving for the future is more valuable than consumption today. Or we're going to have to say it is so valuable that we're going to raise some taxes. Now on things like the Leach, I think we get a policy. The issue will be, do we charge nonprofits, which is where it fell down last time? Because we talked about this a couple
that are
times.
using it.
Well, because the philosophy now has changed, I think appropriately so, is to go to nonprofit community events, and there will tend to be more resistance. But I think at some point we're just going to have to say, and it'll be a fairly minor charge, but it won't build big dollars. But we have the issues in more places than just those. I mean, in the parks, in the water plant, a whole host of places, we really don't have sinking funds to be able to pay for improvements over time.
That's
so
true.
I think we can go further in our paid for events with people, and we just got to come up with a policy that's fair and consistent. It'll be tough in some ways, because we'll have groups that will come in and say, an extra quarter is going to mean, we got people that can't pay an extra quarter or an extra
I don't
dollar.
believe that.
No, no, whether or not you believe, no, I'm not saying,
I would
they'll
laugh
be
in their
there.
face if someone said that. That's
Well, you'll be-
absolutely ridiculous, you know, and they may scoff at me in return, but
They do.
to suggest that, I don't even believe that someone would not go just because of a 50-cent or even a $1 increase.
You look at how the ticket
I think-
prices are
I
different
think-
for the Bodines and someone else. It's $5 more for them, and it's full, and the other ones they have it. If
I
they
think
want
it's
it, they'll get it.
I think those are easier issues, but I think the areas also, in other areas where it even gets tougher, because we don't have that in any of the areas within
Right.
the city.
Well, it just seems to me like any place where admission per person is charged at the Leach, whether it's a for-profit or non-profit, it's X cents or it's $1 or whatever, and that goes into an earmarked fund, and that's used. And although the Northwestern, I see, had suggested just raising the rental fee,
That's another one.
well, that could be done too, as long as something is set aside for that.
There may be a way to do it that way. I mean, that's the same thing, it's just a different way of charging the customers
Yeah.
and defining exactly who the customer is.
Right.
I think we have to move in that direction, and I think the grant has made that clear, and I think we will. I oppose doing it just on the case of Waterfest, because I think we need to look at it more broadly and decide where it's going to
A
happen.
bigger situation.
Yeah.
And to do that in 2-week time when there was no proposal on the table didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, and I don't think that Dr. Palmieri was targeting Waterfest. It was just, that was what was on the agenda. He wanted to bring up the discussion again, you know, and it was frustrating as a viewer and a taxpayer sitting at home watching, because every time it's brought up, the response is, this isn't the appropriate time.
I understand that.
You know, and,
Sure.
and that's frustrating. We're almost out of time here, but I wanted to get to one more thing here of Dan's. If the proposed special events policy fails, then who should pay for the expenses for cleanup, police, fire protection, etc., for some of these major events in the city?
I would say whoever the person is renting the place that evening, as far as depending on what they charge for the item, they would incorporate it into their fees they have, that they know they can afford it with the show that they have.
Okay, so then the police and fire or whatever would have to keep track of their
Right.
hours? Okay, all right.
I think the first thing we have to do is get the cost out on the table, and that is really is one goal of special events policy. Because I think we're going to have a special events policy. I don't know what it'll look like, what's on
Right.
the table now. And the real value, there's two real values in that, and so I'm hopeful we'll get something out of it. One is to show what the actual costs are, because sometimes I think we underestimate them, sometimes we overestimate them. The second thing is to make the process easier when people come down, and I think when you read it, it's intimidating to look at. It looks worse than it actually is. And I think the council's going to have to make some decisions about this, is that as a city, there are some of these events that we want to have in the city. And so we may waive some kinds of expenses for barricades. For instance, parades is one of the issues that is out there now. We just might waive it because we may say the dollar value isn't that great, and trying to charge people who put on the parade and do that is inappropriate. I think where the issue's going to come up is in those that use large numbers of dollars. And what I like about the special events policy is if we exempt away some of the smaller ones and take away their work and they can have theirs, we'll look at the large ones, see what the actual cost is. And my view is that there probably should be some cost sharing on that. Because we as a city provide services, and we should be expected. But when they're extremely high and extremely special, I think that we just, with our budgetary situation, we have to engage in cost sharing.
Okay, all right. I think we're probably out of time here, so we're going to wrap things up. And I just want to say thanks to both of you for being here. And
Thanks for having us.
You know, thanks to Dan Becker in the early half of the show. Go to the polls on, don't know what my camera is here, there's no light lit. Go to the polls on Tuesday, April 6th. There are 3 seats available for the Common Council. There's 3 seats coming up for election on the school board as well. So that's going to do it for us. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.